Today we're driving round the southern end of Doncaster's Hatfield Chase. A major part of its history dates back to the altercation known as the English Civil War, in which the locals kicked off about Charles I, but it was more about their land than anything to do with religious practices. We'll be passing through Everton, Drakeholes, Gringley on the Hill and Misterton. Oddly, this part of Doncaster is in Nottinghamshire, yet they all have Doncaster postcodes, Doncaster being in South Yorkshire. I'll tell you what I learnt in this video. Everton, Gringley on the Hill and Misterton all look like sleepy middle-class stockbroker retirement villages today. Perhaps I'm wrong, so if you know any different, please tell me in the comments below. At a guess, most people know the A631 as the road from South Yorkshire to the East Coast, places like Mablethorpe and Skegness. But this section between Bawtry and Gainsborough didn't seem to be all that important 400 years ago. Bawtry had its wharf on the west side of the River Idle, and Gainsborough had its wharf on the east side of the River Trent. And this section of the A631 started in a marsh opposite Bawtry Wharf and ended in a marsh opposite Gainsborough Wharf. So I guess it was no man's land, a land of subsistence farming perhaps, until Chesterfield, which is miles away, got involved. But something had to happen first, and I'll come back to that later. Chesterfield, under an Act of Parliament in the 18th century, started to dig a canal all the way to the River Trent near West Stopwith, near Misterton. And that was right at the time the Industrial Revolution began, except, contrary to popular belief, manufacturing in Britain had already started 100 years earlier. I mean, why dig a 2 billion canal in today's money on the spec if you don't know it's going to be viable? You see, unlike HS2, the Chesterfield Canal wasn't funded by the taxpayer. The canal crossed this road just after Everton at a place called Drakeholes. In fact, it goes under the road by one of the two tunnels on the Chesterfield Canal. I guess the Chesterfield Canal put paid to Bawtry's ambitions as a river port, and the stagecoach gave way to the railways, leaving Bawtry with its curated lifestyle, its upper-class nail bars and hairdressers, etc. Hey, don't blame me for that description, it's pretty common. Everton had a mill originally owned by a Mr. Longbottom, seeing it was called Longbottom's Mill, and one could only guess that it thrived due to the Chesterfield Canal, accessible just along the road at Drakeholes. That's basically all the history I've managed to find about Everton. The A631 at Drakeholes was bypassed in the 1970s, but shortly afterwards the road developed cracks and the traffic was rerouted back on this old road while it was repaired. And the reason I know that is because I used to use this route to get to Cadwell Park, where I used to be a volunteer track marshal. This is what Drakeholes looks like. We rejoin the A631 here and continue to our next drive-through, which is Gringley on the Hill. The Chesterfield Canal goes north of this road to the west of Gringley on the Hill. It's called Gringley on the Hill because it's on a hill that was high enough to have a beacon. These kind of elevated spots were ideal for beacon fires because they were visible across long distances. It was likely part of a national network of warning fires, historically used to signal danger, such as impending invasions. This system was especially active from medieval times through to the Napoleonic era. You can get an idea of the steepness of the fall-off of the land on its northern side, driving along High Street. Beacon Hill is at the eastern end of the street, the other side of Beacon Hill Road, and there we'll turn left and head for Misterton. And the Chesterfield Canal is now over to our left, but it's about half a mile away, so we won't be able to see it from here, but we'll cross it on the way into Misterton. And here Gringley's history becomes confusing, because, according to the Domesday Book, it had a fishery, but I don't see a river anywhere in sight, just this canal which wasn't there at the time. But it did have a swamp. It had marshland, and that marshland was wet enough for, guess what? Eels. I don't like eels. And the marshland was part of Hatfield Chase. And Charles I appointed the Dutch engineer Cornelius Vermuyden to drain it in 1626, and that was the end of the Gringley eels. However, before it got drained, it got flooded on purpose, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But back to the canal. And you need dry land if you were digging a canal, because canals need to have banks to hold the water in, and a marsh is a marsh, which doesn't. So it was thanks to Charles I that the Chesterfield Canal became possible by 1771, when the canal was dug, and this area had become dry land. But between the draining of Hatfield Chase and the digging of Chesterfield Canal came the English Civil War. Charles I was executed, Christmas was banned, and there was a lot of civil unrest here in swampland. And as we reach Misterton and beyond, the land gets rather flat. So did it get flat simply by drainage? No, instead they erected banks and let the rivers flood, which deposited silt as much as 1 metre deep, and that process was known as warping. Warping was the former practice of letting turbid river water flood onto agricultural land so that its suspended sediment could form a layer, before letting the water drain away. In this way, poor soils were covered with fertile fine silt, and their rentable value was increased. Therefore, some landowners got rich, and the poor subsistence farmers got poorer, and the people round here kicked off and joined in with the civil disobedience, even if it was nothing to do with the monarchy. Anyway, the result of the flooding was a perfectly flat field, and that's what you see around here for miles and miles. The raised banks eventually became roads, such as Sanderson's Bank, Idle Bank, and Tyndale Bank Road. The Chesterfield Canal flowed through this land and eventually reached the River Trent, 1 mile east of Misterton. Today the remains of the Chesterfield Canal are used for pleasure craft, begging the question, do we do anything except pleasure in England these days? On this journey, except for other road users, I've only seen farming, canal boats, pubs and food establishments, nail bars, hairdressers and Botox. If there's anything else, please let me know. Nottingham, with Doncaster postcodes, and just north of Misterton, right on one of the banks used for warping, the previously mentioned Tyndale Bank Road, which is right here. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done already.